He leaned back in his chair, smirked like he'd already won, and said it like a prophecy. "You'll come crawling back." I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I didn't even raise my voice. I just nodded, handed over my badge, and walked out like the hallway belonged to me. Because what he didn't understand was this. My exit wasn't me losing a job. It was me removing the one person who'd been quietly protecting him from his own shortcuts. And as I drove home, I wasn't thinking about rent or pride. I was thinking about the folder I'd printed that morning and the one client call I still had scheduled for 9 a.m. the next day. By then, his crawling back line was already turning into a liability. I'm a process guy, not in the annoying, let's circle back way, in the way where if I'm responsible for something, I keep receipts. For almost 7 years, I worked at a mid-sized logistics software company, big enough to have investors and quarterly targets, small enough that one manager could run a department, like his personal kingdom. My manager was Darren. Darren was the kind of guy who spoke in slogans when he was lying. Alignment, ownership, speed over perfection. What he meant was, do it fast, do it quiet, and if something breaks, make sure someone else's name is on it. He wasn't stupid. That's what made him dangerous. He was charming in meetings, generous when executives were watching, and vicious when it was just you and him in a small room with the door closed. I wasn't his favorite person. I was the person he needed. I managed our biggest client account, an industrial supplier that rolled out our system across 3 regions. They were strict, paper-heavy, the kind of customer that asked for everything in writing. They'd been burned before, so they kept their own records, and I respected that. Darren hated it. He wanted everything to happen over quick calls, vague verbal approvals, and we'll formalize it later. I knew how that story ends, so I kept everything tight. Meeting notes, follow-up emails, change requests, red lines, not because I was paranoid, because it was my job. Over the past year, Darren's pressure shifted. He stopped caring about long-term renewals and started caring about this quarter's numbers, like his mortgage depended on them. Maybe it did. He started pushing optimizations that weren't optimizations. He wanted me to slide deliverables, relabel delayed milestones as in progress, and, my favorite, move certain support work into a bundled services bucket, so it didn't look like we were hemorrhaging hours. "We're not lying," he told me once, smiling too hard. "We're telling the story." I told him I wouldn't sign off on anything inaccurate. He stared at me for a full 5 seconds, then softened his tone like he was talking to a child. "You're loyal," he said. "I like that. But loyalty doesn't pay your bills. Results do." From that point on, he treated me like a problem that needed fixing. It wasn't immediate. It was little cuts. My calendar started filling with last-minute meetings that always conflicted with client calls. My requests for resources got lost. He'd forget to include me on threads where decisions were made, then blame me for not being aware of them. And every time I pushed back, he'd hit me with the same line. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Then came the Friday that changed everything. We were in a quarterly review. Darren wanted to show a clean story to the VP, new logos, improved retention, controlled support costs. In the draft deck, he'd included a slide that claimed our biggest client had expanded scope, based on strong satisfaction. I had the actual client feedback on my screen. They were satisfied with me, not with the product. They were threatening penalties if certain fixes weren't delivered by the next month. So I said calmly in front of Darren and the VP, "That's not accurate. They haven't expanded. They're in a remediation period. I can share the latest email chain." The room went quiet. Darren didn't look at the VP. He looked at me. Later that afternoon, he called me into a small conference room. No windows, just a glossy table and a cheap speakerphone. HR was already on the call. That's when I knew it wasn't a conversation. It was a procedure. The HR rep, Melissa, sounded tired, like she'd done this 10 times that week. "Thanks for joining," she said. This is a formal meeting regarding your role. Darren's voice was warm, too warm. Let's keep it simple, he said. We need people who can move with the business. Melissa read a script about organizational changes and alignment. Then she said the line that made my stomach drop. Today will be your last day. I didn't panic. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I asked one question. Is this a termination or a mutual separation? Silence. Darren clicked his pen. Call it whatever helps you sleep. Melissa cleared her throat. It will be processed as a separation. You'll receive documents by end of day. I watched Darren's face while she said it. He wasn't tense. He was enjoying it. I understood something in that moment. This wasn't about performance. This was Darren removing friction. I'd embarrassed him in front of leadership, and he wanted to make sure I didn't do it again. He slid a manila envelope across the table like he was doing me a favor. Inside were the basics: a severance offer, a generic NDA reminder, a summary of benefits, and a checklist for returning company property. I flipped through it slowly. On the surface, it was clean, but I noticed what wasn't there. There was no acknowledgement of the client obligations I managed, no transition plan, no handover schedule, no risk review. Darren wanted me gone fast because fast meant no questions. He watched me scan the pages and leaned back, almost relaxed. I'll be honest, he said. People like you always think they're irreplaceable. I met his eyes. I don't think that. He smirked wider. Good, because you're not. He tapped the envelope. Take the weekend. Reality hits on Monday. You'll come crawling back. He said it like he was doing me a kindness, like he was warning me not to get ideas. And here's the part that matters. I didn't react because I already knew what he didn't. That morning, before the meeting, something in me had felt off. Not intuition, pattern recognition. Darren had canceled my 1-1, asked for a quick status export, and had IT schedule a routine access audit for my account. All on the same day. So I did what I always do when someone starts moving strangely. I prepared. I printed my active project tracker. I printed the signed change orders. I printed the client escalation emails and my responses. I exported my calendar invites for the next 2 weeks. I saved copies of the monthly utilization reports. Darren kept asking me to reframe, not to sabotage anyone, to protect myself. Because if Darren was going to push the blame downhill, I knew exactly where he'd aim it. He'd point at the biggest client. He'd point at the delays. He'd point at me. Melissa ended the call and asked me to return my laptop by 5. I stood up, tucked the envelope under my arm, and slid my chair in without a sound. Darren followed me to the door like he was escorting a guest out of his house. As we stepped into the hallway, he dropped his voice. "Don't take it personal," he said. "This is business." I looked at him, nodded once, and said, "Understood." Then I walked. Not fast, not slow, normal. I passed my team without making a scene. I didn't give Darren the satisfaction of watching me break. At my desk, I packed quietly. One notebook, a framed photo, a coffee mug someone gave me on my 3rd year. I left everything else. As I headed to the elevator, my phone buzzed. An email notification. From our biggest client's procurement lead. Subject line. Monday 9:06 a.m. Confirm attendance. I stopped walking for a second, thumb hovering over the screen. Because that call wasn't optional. That call was where we either saved the contract or triggered penalties that would hit the company's financials like a hammer. And Darren had just walked me out like none of that mattered. I stepped into the elevator. Another buzz. A Teams message from a coworker in finance. "Did you just get separated? Darren's in the war room. Legal's asking for your documentation." The doors closed, and for the first time all day, I smiled, just slightly. Because Darren thought the story ended with me leaving. It didn't. It started there. By Monday morning, I was already awake before my alarm. Not because I missed work, because I knew exactly what Darren would do first. He would try to replace me in the only place it mattered, in front of the client. At 8:12 a.m., my phone lit up with a blocked number. I let it ring out. At 8:19, a second call. Same. At 8:27, a third. Then finally, a text from a number I recognized, the director above Darren. Hey, quick question. Do you have time for a call? Urgent. I stared at the screen for a long second, then set the phone face down on my kitchen table. Because urgent was Darren's favorite word when he needed you to fix the mess he created. And I wasn't his employee anymore. I made coffee, slow, deliberate. I sat down, opened my laptop, my personal one, and pulled up the calendar export I'd saved. 9 a.m. Client call, the procurement lead, their operations head, their legal liaison. They weren't going to chat. They were going to decide whether our company was still worth trusting. And Darren had fired the one person who actually had a relationship with them. At 8:44, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Darren, not a call, an email. Subject line, need you on 9 a.m. client call. No greeting, no apology, no explanation, just a single sentence in the body. Join the call and keep it professional. I laughed once, quiet, bitter, and then I stopped, because it wasn't funny. It was exactly who he was. He'd humiliate you on Friday, then treat you like a tool on Monday. I replied with one line. I'm no longer employed. Please coordinate with your current account lead. I hit send and watched the message leave like a door locking. 2 minutes later, my phone rang. Darren, again. I answered this time, but I didn't say hello. He did. Good, he said, like we were mid-conversation. I saw your email. Don't do this. My jaw tightened. Don't do what? I asked. Play the wounded hero, he said. You know the client. They trust you. You owe the team a smooth transition. There it was. The word, "owe." The way he said it made it sound moral. Like he wasn't asking me to work for free. Like he wasn't trying to use the relationship I built to keep himself out of trouble. I don't owe you anything, I said, calm. He exhaled sharply. Listen, if this call goes bad, it affects everyone, not just me. You should have thought about that before you fired me, I said. A pause. Then his voice changed, lower, colder. Be smart, he said. You're going to need references. That's when irritation turned into something sharper. You threatened my livelihood on Friday, I said. Now you're asking me to protect your quarter? I'm asking you to be an adult, Darren snapped. I didn't raise my voice. I am being an adult, I said. Adults get paid for their work. Another pause. Then he tried to sound reasonable again. Fine, he said. We'll pay you as a contractor. 1 hour. Just join, answer questions, and we'll be done. And for a half second, I almost considered it. Because I cared about the people on my old team and because the client didn't deserve chaos. But then I remembered something important. Contract work isn't a verbal promise. It's a written agreement. And Darren didn't do written when it didn't benefit him. Send me a contract, I said, with rate, scope, and indemnification. Signed by finance, he scoffed. It's a 1 hour call. It's a call where you're asking me to represent a company that just terminated me, I said. So yes, I want it in writing. He went quiet. Then softly he said the part he thought would bring me back into line. You're making a mistake. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence stretch. No, I said. I'm refusing to make yours. And I hung up. At 8:58, I watched the time on my laptop. At 8:59, my phone started buzzing again. Not Darren. My former coworker, Jenna, a project manager who sat 2 desks away from me for 3 years. I answered. Her voice was tense. Are you okay? I'm fine, I said. What's happening? She swallowed. They put Darren as the account lead. He's on the client call right now. I could hear office noise behind her, muffled voices, fast footsteps, stress. How bad? I asked. Jenna hesitated. They asked for the remediation plan. Darren didn't have the latest version. Of course he didn't. Because Darren didn't read plans. He sold optimism. What did he say? I asked. He said you left abruptly and didn't document properly, she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. He's blaming you. My grip tightened around my phone. Say that again, I said. He told them you didn't leave clean handover notes, Jenna whispered, and now they're asking for your emails. My irritation turned into a cold, controlled focus, because this wasn't just Darren being petty. This was Darren building a paper trail that made me the fall guy. Jenna, I said steady, I need you to listen carefully. Okay. Do not send them anything from my old mailbox, I said. If legal asks for records, let legal handle it. Not Darren, not ops. Legal, she breathed out. He's yelling at Melissa from HR. He wants my access to your tracker. He can't have it, I said. We share drive folders, she said. He's telling it to unlock everything. I closed my eyes for 1 second. If Darren got access to the wrong files, he'd do what he always did. Copy, paste, edit context, and pretend it was truth. He wouldn't fix the problem. He'd rewrite history. Jenna, I said, are you willing to forward me something? There was a pause. What? The message where he blames me, I said. Any email or chat. Anything with his wording. She hesitated again because she was smart, and she knew what a line like that could mean. I shouldn't, she whispered. I'm not asking you to break policy, I said. I'm asking you to protect yourself too. Because if he's blaming me today, you're next. Silence. Then Jenna said, okay, I'll send what I can from my side. A minute later, a screenshot came through. Teams message from Darren to a group chat titled Client War Room. Reminder, Alex left with incomplete documentation. Don't mention internal delays. Keep the story clean. I stared at it. Incomplete documentation. That was the lie he needed to justify the chaos he was creating. And keep the story clean told me something else. He wasn't trying to solve the client's concerns. He was trying to manage perception. I saved the screenshot immediately. Date, time, sender, everything visible. Then I opened the folder I'd printed on Friday. The change orders, the emails, the remediation plan he'd ignored, the utilization reports he'd asked me to relabel, and I realized something quietly, sitting alone at my kitchen table. Darren didn't fire me because I was replaceable. He fired me because I was dangerous to him, because I documented, because I refused to tell the story when the story was a lie. And now he'd stepped into the account lead role without the knowledge, the relationship, or the evidence. At 9:41 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time it was the procurement lead, the client calling my personal number. I froze. I hadn't given them that number, which meant one of two things. Either Darren handed it over, or they went looking because they didn't trust what they were hearing. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. Hello, I said. A familiar voice exhaled on the other end. Controlled, professional, but strained. Alex, he said. It's Mark. We're on a call right now. Darren is explaining things. I didn't speak. Mark continued, lower now. We need clarity, he said, because what we're hearing doesn't match the written trail you've been sending for months. I stared at the wall in my kitchen, heart steady, mind sharp. Mark wasn't calling to chat. He was calling because someone was lying on a recorded line, and he wanted to know if I was going to correct it. I took a slow breath. Mark, I said carefully, I'm not authorized to represent the company anymore. A pause. Then, we're not asking you to represent them, he said. We're asking you to tell us the truth. And in that moment, I understood the trap Darren had built. If I spoke freely, he'd claim I sabotaged him. If I stayed silent, he'd rewrite the narrative and pin the fallout on me. Either way, he planned to win. So I chose a third option, the one Darren never planned for. Mark, I said, send me an email from your company address. Ask for the documentation trail regarding scope and remediation. I can reply with what I personally authored and previously delivered to your team. Mark didn't hesitate. Done, he said. And after he hung up, I looked at the screenshot Jenna sent me again. Keep the story clean. I didn't know it yet, but that sentence would cost Darren everything. Mark's email hit my inbox before I could finish my coffee. Subject: request for documentation trail. Scope: remediation, milestones short. Formal: the kind of email you send when legal is sitting beside you, reading over your shoulder. I stared at it for a full minute because I understood what it meant. If I answered carelessly, Darren could claim I leaked confidential information. If I didn't answer at all, Darren would keep telling his clean story until it became the official one. And then silence. The kind that means something's gone wrong. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Darren. Do not contact the client. Consider this a reminder of your obligations. I didn't reply. I opened the severance packet again and read it like it was evidence, not paperwork. There it was, the standard confidentiality language, the non-disparagement clause, the part that said I couldn't harm the company's reputation. But there was also something else. One line in the separation terms that made my stomach turn. Employee acknowledges all work product and related materials remain the exclusive property of the company. Work product, related materials. Darren wasn't just trying to manage the client. He was trying to control what I could prove. I didn't panic. I did what I always do. I built a clean timeline. I pulled out the folder I'd printed on Friday and laid it on my kitchen table like a case file. Change orders with client signatures, the remediation plan I'd sent, meeting notes with follow-up emails, and the utilization report Darren wanted me to reframe. Then I opened Mark's email and wrote a reply I could defend in front of a judge. I didn't attach anything new. I didn't reveal anything internal. I didn't forward proprietary files. I did something simpler and safer. I wrote, I am no longer authorized to represent the company. I can confirm what I personally sent to your team while employed. For any official records, your counsel should request directly from the company's legal department. Below is a time-stamped list of the communications I personally sent, including the dates, subjects, and what each message contained. Then I pasted the timeline. 8 entries, all factual. No opinions, no insults, just receipts. At the end, I added one line. If any statement is being made that I left abruptly or failed to document, please reference the communications above, which were delivered to your team prior to my separation. I read it twice, then a third time, and right before I hit send, I paused, because even a perfect email doesn't stop a liar from escalating. So I did the one thing I should have done earlier in my career. I called an employment attorney, not a dramatic one, not a billboard guy. A quiet corporate employment lawyer who asked me 2 questions in the first 60 seconds. Do you have documentation? And have they said anything provably false about you? Yes, I said, and yes. Then stop speaking on the phone, he said. Do everything in writing, and don't send anything the client doesn't already have. That was it. No pep talk, just procedure. I sent Mark the email, then I waited. 2 minutes later, a new message arrived from Melissa in HR. Subject: reminder, post-employment obligations. It was polite on the surface, corporate-friendly, but the tone underneath was pure threat. Please refrain from contacting clients, employees, or vendors. All external communications must be directed through Darren. Refrain, as if I was a child being corrected. I forwarded it to my attorney and didn't respond. At 10:26, Jenna called me again. They're spiraling, she whispered. Who is? I asked. Darren, she said. He's saying you're interfering. He's telling people you're bitter and unstable. I felt something in my chest tighten. Not fear, not anger. A clean, cold clarity. Because that wasn't just trash talk. That was Darren laying groundwork for a character assassination. If he could paint me as emotional, then anything I said became revenge, not truth. Jenna, I said quietly, do not repeat that verbally to anyone. If he wrote it anywhere, screenshot it. I'll try, she said. Then she lowered her voice further. Legal is here, she said, like actual legal, not just HR. That mattered. Companies don't bring in legal because everything is fine. They bring in legal because they can see the lawsuit forming in real time. At 11:05, Mark replied, "No fluff. Thank you. This aligns with our records. Please stand by." One sentence, but it told me everything. Darren's story wasn't just messy, it was contradicting documents the client already had, which meant Darren wasn't fighting a perception problem, he was fighting reality. An hour later, I received a calendar invite from an unknown internal address. Title: Exit Clarification, Attendance Requested. No agenda, no details, just a time slot, and 2 attendees listed: Melissa, HR, Corporate Counsel, Legal. I didn't accept. I forwarded it to my attorney. He called me back within 10 minutes. "They're trying to get you on record," he said. "They want you to say something they can weaponize. If you speak, I'm on the line too. Otherwise, I'll decline." So I declined, and then I did something that felt strange, but necessary. I wrote my own email, one I'd never written in my life, to legal, in writing, clean and direct. I said, "I am aware of false statements being made about my documentation and separation. I will not engage in verbal discussions without counsel present. I request the company cease disseminating false claims about my conduct. Any future communication should be directed to my attorney." It wasn't aggressive, it was adult. And the moment I hit send, I felt the shift. That night, I stopped being the hero. I stopped trying to save the team. I stopped trying to be the good employee who absorbs the mess quietly. I became the person Darren could no longer control. At 3:14 p.m., Jenna sent me another screenshot. Different thread, different tone. Darren again typing fast. "If legal asks, Alex downloaded materials before separation. We may need to recover." My blood ran cold, not because I was guilty, but because I knew exactly what he was doing. He was trying to reframe my preparation as theft, a preemptive strike. If he could claim I took materials, then any evidence I had became stolen property instead of documentation. I sent it to my attorney immediately. His response came back in under a minute. "Do not destroy anything. Do not explain. We respond once, formally." At 4:02 p.m., I got an email from Corporate Counsel. Subject: Request for return of company materials. It was written in that legal tone that pretends it's neutral while loading the gun. "Please confirm you have not retained, copied, or disclosed proprietary company information. If you have, we require immediate return and certification of deletion." I read it twice, then set my phone down, because I understood what this was. They weren't asking. They were building a record to protect Darren, even if it meant crushing me. And that's when the final piece clicked into place. Darren didn't fire me because I was difficult. He fired me because I was the only person in that department who refused to let him rewrite the past. Now that I was gone, he tried to rewrite it anyway. But he made one mistake. He put it in writing. I opened my laptop, created a new folder, and started saving everything. Every email, every screenshot, every timestamp, like I was preparing for court. Because at that point, it wasn't about pride. It was about survival. And as the sun went down, my attorney called me with a tone I hadn't heard yet. Not calm, not procedural. Alert. "They just escalated," he said. "What did they do?" I asked. He paused. "They contacted the client," he said, "and they claimed you're the reason the remediation failed." I stared at my kitchen table, at the neat stack of printed receipts, and felt the quiet certainty settle in. If Darren wanted a fight, he was finally going to get one. And in part 4, he was going to learn the difference between a threat and a record. The next morning, my attorney sent one email, 3 attachments, no emotion, a formal response to Corporate Counsel, a notice to preserve records, and a demand that the company stop repeating false statements about me. It wasn't dramatic, it was clinical. It said in plain language, I did not steal materials. I did not interfere with a client. Any claim that I caused operational failure was false and unsupported. From this point forward, all contact goes through counsel. Then came the part that changed the temperature in the room. He attached screenshots Jenna had provided. Darren telling the war room I left incomplete documentation, telling them to keep the story clean, and floating the idea that I downloaded materials right before separation, not as an accusation, as proof of motive. Within an hour, I got a new email from corporate counsel, same polite tone, different posture. Thank you. We are reviewing. Please refrain from further distribution of internal communications. My attorney replied with one line. You will preserve them, you will not retaliate, and you will correct the record. At 9:17 a.m., my phone rang again. Block number. I didn't answer. At 9:19, the same number called back. Then a text came through from a different number, Darren's. This is getting out of hand. You're hurting yourself. I stared at it for 2 seconds and deleted it, because the you in that sentence wasn't me, it was him. Jenna called 10 minutes later. She sounded like she was walking fast. They're locking everything down, she whispered. What do you mean? I asked. Legal sent a litigation hold, she said. Email retention. Teams retention. No deletions. IT is freezing access. I felt a tightness in my shoulders loosen. A litigation hold means the company is no longer trusting internal discretion. It means counsel is preparing for the possibilities that a judge might read everything. Jenna kept talking, and her words came out in short bursts. They pulled Darren out of the war room, she said, like mid-sentence. Melissa just walked in with corporate counsel and said, We need you now. He tried to argue. Nobody cared. I didn't speak for a moment. Is he fired? I asked. I don't know, she said, but he's not running the client anymore. They reassigned it to the VP. That was my first real breath in days, because that meant the company had finally acknowledged what Darren refused to. The client didn't have a story problem. They had a credibility problem. At 11:03 a.m., Mark emailed me again, shorter than the first. We issued a formal notice to your company, counsel to counsel from here. I read it twice. Formal notice. That's what clients send when they're documenting breach, penalties, or termination rights. And if Darren had told them I was the reason remediation failed, they weren't just angry, they were collecting ammunition. That afternoon, my attorney briefed me on what he was seeing. Their counsel is softening, he said. They're trying to separate the company from Darren's statements. What does that mean? I asked. It means they're realizing he made representations that aren't supported by records, he said, and they don't want those representations to become corporate admissions. Translation. Darren's mouth was now a legal risk. At 2:26 p.m., corporate counsel requested a call, with my attorney present, and for the first time, Darren's name wasn't copied on the thread. We joined. Corporate counsel spoke like a man who just lost a weekend to a crisis he didn't create. Alex, he said, we want to clarify a few things and bring this to resolution. My attorney cut in calmly. No, he said. You want to contain liability. We want correction, non-retaliation, and confirmation that false statements will stop. There was a pause. Papers shuffled. Then corporate counsel asked the question he wouldn't have asked yesterday. Do you have any other communications showing Mr. Pao directed employees to misrepresent documentation status? My attorney didn't answer immediately. He looked at me on video, just long enough for me to understand what was happening. They weren't protecting Darren anymore. They were investigating him. We have sufficient evidence, my attorney said, to show intent to shift blame and to smear my client. We will provide what is necessary if you confirm, in writing, that Mr. S has no authority to contact the client regarding my client's separation, and that you will issue a correction internally. Corporate counsel agreed, carefully, lawyer to lawyer, without saying Darren's name. And then the call ended. 30 minutes later, Jenna sent me one more screenshot. Not from Darren this time, from the VP. A message to the war room. Effective immediately. All client communications routed through VP and legal. Do not speculate about personnel matters. Do not attribute delays to former employees. That line, do not attribute delays to former employees, was the closest thing to an apology the company was going to give quickly. But the real emotional shift came later that evening. At 6:14 p.m., I got a voicemail from a number I recognized. Darren's personal line. I didn't listen to it immediately. When I finally did, it was him. No smugness, no prophecy voice, just panic wrapped in arrogance. "Hey," he said, breathing hard, "we can fix this. You can just tell them it was a misunderstanding. You don't want to burn bridges. You'll need us." I stared at my kitchen table where my evidence folder was still sitting, neat and quiet. He fired me. He threatened references. He blamed me to a client. He tried to label my documentation as theft. And now he wanted me to save him. I deleted the voicemail. That night, I got an email from corporate counsel addressed to my attorney and me. Subject: Internal Review Confirmation. It said they were conducting an internal review regarding communications made during and after my separation, and that Darren had been instructed not to contact me. It didn't say suspended. It didn't say removed. It didn't say disciplined, but it didn't have to. The company had finally put a leash on the man who'd been acting like he owned it. And for the first time since Friday, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not victory. Relief. Because Darren's favorite weapon, rewriting reality, only works when everyone is too scared to document the truth. Now, everything was preserved. Everything was time-stamped. Everything was on record. And the last thing Darren ever wanted was a record that didn't belong to him. 2 weeks passed without a single direct message from Darren. No smug lines, no crawling back, no late-night calls, just silence. And if you've ever been in corporate long enough, you know what that silence usually means. Someone higher up finally stepped in. My attorney kept the pace slow and controlled. No emotional emails, no long explanations, just concise written positions and requests. A written correction to the client-facing narrative. A commitment to non-retaliation. A neutral reference letter confirming dates and role. Payment of the severance as promised, plus reimbursement for the week they tried to pull me back in under pressure. The company's responses became shorter, too. They weren't fighting anymore. They were measuring cost. On a Thursday morning, corporate counsel sent the first message that actually mattered. Subject: Resolution Proposal. 3 pages, clean, structured. They agreed to issue a written clarification to the client, stating my separation did not cause or contribute to the remediation delays. Instruct leadership and HR to stop distributing any claim that I left abruptly or failed to document. Provide a neutral reference, title, dates, eligibility for rehire marked yes. Pay the severance per the original agreement and cover my attorney's fees up to a capped amount. But the sentence that gave me the most satisfaction wasn't about money. It was one line in the middle of page 2. Mr. Stu is no longer employed by the company. No explanation, no drama, just removal. I read it twice, then handed my phone to my attorney on video. He nodded once. That, he said, is as close as you get to a confession in corporate. I didn't celebrate. I didn't take a victory lap. I just sat there, feeling something settle in my chest that I hadn't felt since this started. Safety. Because when Darren was in the building, I was always one meeting away from becoming his scapegoat. Now he was out, and the world didn't collapse. It just corrected. Later that same day, Mark, the client procurement lead, replied to the company's clarification email with one short message. I wasn't copied, but he forwarded it to me from his address because he knew I'd want to see it. It read, "Acknowledged. Future communications will be routed through VP and counsel. We appreciate the clarity." No warmth, no praise, but it told me the relationship wasn't dead. The lie had been caught before it became permanent. That night, Jenna called me, and for the first time, she didn't sound scared. "You heard?" she asked. "I did," I said. She exhaled. "People are acting like they always hated him, like suddenly everyone remembers." "Of course," I said. She laughed, small, tired. "You know what the strangest part is?" "What?" I asked. "They're saying you were too rigid, that you didn't adapt." She paused. "But legal keeps asking for your trackers, your notes, your emails, like they're gold." I leaned back on my couch and stared at the ceiling. "That's the whole thing," I said quietly. "They call it rigid until they need it." After we hung up, I opened my laptop and looked at my calendar. The 9 a.m. call was still there, now meaningless, already past. But I kept it on the screen for a while anyway, because it reminded me of the moment the story flipped. Darren thought power was proximity. He thought if he could fire me, shame me, and threaten my references, I'd fold. He thought I'd crawl back to be professional. But professionalism isn't obedience. It's documentation. It's boundaries. It's knowing the difference between helping the team and letting someone use you as a shield. A week later, I started a new job, not because I desperately needed to prove anything, though the pay was better, because the hiring manager said something in the second interview that felt like oxygen. "We don't punish people for keeping records," he said. "We rely on them." On my first day, I didn't walk in nervous. I walked in calm. And I thought about Darren's face when he said, "You'll come crawling back." He wasn't predicting my future. He was revealing his mindset. He believed everyone had a price, and that fear was cheaper than respect. He was wrong. I never crawled back. I never begged. I never raised my voice. I just did what he didn't think I could do. I made the truth impossible to rewrite. And the funniest part, the only person who ended up crawling was him. Not to me, to legal.